Okay, how about now? All right. I have a short 1-hour speech that I'm going to give, and then you guys can get on with your day. Thank you, Leah McGrath, and thank you to the entire team. You guys can go sit down. Thank you to the entire team of dedicated professionals that we have. They've made such a tremendous progress when it comes to creating a smart, vibrant, and entrepreneurial city. You know, one of the most humbling aspects of my job is to work alongside each and every one of these individuals on a daily basis, not only within the confines of City Hall, but throughout our entire community. I also want to welcome my teammates here today. The City Council have been extraordinary partners in this journey over the last 5 years. I would also like to welcome our school board, county commissioners, local elected officials, state legislators, and most importantly, all of the community members that took time out of their busy schedule to learn a little bit about what's happening in their city today and maybe gain some insights into what the future holds. You know, it seems like just yesterday, but 4.5 years ago, I stood on a stage much like this, and I articulated a vision of becoming a smart, vibrant, and entrepreneurial city. That vision was grounded in the fact that the globe was changing, the world was changing around us, and we had to adapt and evolve in order to be successful for the long term. We have made tremendous progress towards that end, but there's much work left to be done. And in that time period, over the last 4.5 years, something else happened. The world continued to change. And therefore, we must continue to evolve to ensure that we can make the next generation as successful as Fishers that we have experienced. You know, the other day, I was talking to my father about what it was like growing up in Lisbon, North Dakota. I grew up in a small town called Lisbon, North Dakota. And if you look on the screen here, you'll see actually a picture of Main Street in Lisbon, North Dakota. Back in its heyday, the agrarian economy, where farmers in near proximity would bring their products into Main Street to exchange for goods that made life livable on the prairie. Today, that Main Street's dying, if not dead. My dad and I were talking about what it would have been like to be the mayor back in the glory days of Lisbon, North Dakota, during the agrarian economy. What would have been the things I would have focused on as mayor? As I thought about it, I realized I probably would have focused on the basics. Transportation, can the wagons get through town? Sanitation, are we making sure that people aren't dying from disease? Those are the things I would have thought about if I were mayor of an agrarian economy. Now I fast forward and I started thinking about what would it have been like to be the mayor of an industrial city during the prowess of the industrial economy. When communities popped up around railroads and seaports and waterways in their proximity to raw materials. When thousands of people flocked to the urban core to support their families by working in the mills and in the assembly plant floor or in the slaughterhouses. I would imagine all those thousands of people, if I were the mayor back then, I probably would have viewed those people more as a liability than an asset. I would have focused on much of the same things that the agrarian economy did, like transportation and safety and sanitation. Now let's fast forward to today. As I stand here today, I'm the mayor of a 21st century city and a 21st century economy. The long-term viability and success of my city will not be dependent upon my proximity to farmers. It won't be dependent upon my proximity to raw materials, railways, or waterways. The long-term success of our city will be dependent upon our ability to create the most unique experience and environment that aggregates the most precious natural resource that's driving the 21st century economy. Just the other day, I was talking to a group of elementary kids, as I often do, and I asked them this very question. What is the most precious natural resource in the city of Fishers today that's driving the 21st century economy? Hands shot up. First kid said, well, it's got to be the White River. Next kid said it's got to be Geist Reservoir. The third one said it's got to be the trees. And then there's always one in every class. The teachers will tell you this. The fourth hand shot up and said, I found a tiger in my yard last night. Clearly not the answer I was looking for. And a lot of these answers were good answers, but they weren't the conclusion that I've drawn to. The most precious natural resource driving the 21st century economy in our city is talented people. And if that is the most precious natural resource driving our economy for the future, it would do us well to consider the welfare of that resource. How are our people doing? What is the sustainability of our people? And so this led me down a rabbit hole as I started to research and think about how our people are doing in the broader context of our state, our region, and our community. And I walked away from it, frankly, realizing that although we've done amazing things as a state to create an environment that is the most hospitable for business as possible, when it comes to our people, our most precious natural resource driving the 21st century economy, we have some work to do. I want to share with you a few stats that popped out to me. We rank 47th out of 50th in overall public health in the U.S. We rank 48th out of 50th in quality of life, 46th out of 50th in higher education. Keep in mind, the most precious natural resource driving the 21st century economy, talented, educated people. We rank 46th out of 50th. We rank 48th in health and environment, 44th in smoking. In the last 2 years, we have actually increased the number of people, the percentage of people smoking by 6%. Let that sink in terms of our population's long-term health. We rank 42nd in mental health, and just this last year, we saw an annual increase in the number of people saying that they saw frequent mental health distress, 11% increase. Now, these statistics are a snapshot in time. This is just from the last year. So what I want to actually show you is a trajectory. This was a graph that I found that it was very helpful for me. So this shows the overall population health of our state over the last 3 decades, over the last 30 years. Now, it doesn't take a statistician or a mathematician to understand the general trajectory that we find ourselves on. Keep in mind, the most precious natural resource that we have, a slow and steady decline. So, one can look at this and say, how, as an individual city, am I going to change the trajectory of that chart? In fact, for any individual city, the thought of trying to change that trajectory would seem daunting, if not insurmountable. And I would argue that it probably is. That's why we local officials need to roll up our sleeves, not retreat to our individual fiefdoms, not blame the state for all of our woes, and come together and work as a region to tackle these collective issues. Not only because it's simply the right thing to do, but because every other region out there that we're competing against is already doing it. I chair the Central Indiana Conference of Elected Officials, and we took this task at hand and we started looking and comparing ourselves to other regions. Why did we do that? Because today we know that for a fact, individuals, talented people, and companies no longer look at the relevancy of a state, and they don't look at the individual city. They make their decisions on what region they're going to move to. Am I going to move to the Nashville metropolitan area or the Indianapolis metropolitan area? So we decided to benchmark ourselves against them. And frankly, the numbers were sobering. Here is a graph. We're the green bar in each one of these graphs. It shows you the percentage of our people with a Bachelor's of Arts or Science in comparison to our peers. As you can see, we rank among the lowest, and we're growing at one of the slowest rates as well. Again, if our most precious natural resource are talented and educated people, this doesn't bode well for us. There's a direct correlation to this graph in the next one, where we talk about wages. Here you see we have the second lowest wage as Central Indiana in compared to our other regions. And I want to take a moment here and reemphasize, this is not just Indianapolis proper. This is all of us. Carmel, Fishers, Westfield, Noblesville, Greenwood, we're all together in these numbers. What this graph doesn't show you around wages is the fact that Nashville, over the last 5 years, grew at twice the rate that we did. So if I'm back up here, if all things hold steady, if I'm back up here 3 years from now, we would have the lowest wages of any of the regions that we compared ourselves to. In another bar chart, that's a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, entrepreneurship, something that John Wexler touched on and is fighting every day for, we actually held our own in this particular category. But we shouldn't be complacent about that, because over the last few years, we've actually seen double-digit declines in this percentage. The measurement is the number of jobs that are associated with companies that are 5 years or younger. That's how they measure this particular graph. But as you can see, we're certainly not leading the pack, but in this particular case, at least we're not at the bottom. Now, the next slide is what really struck a stake through my heart, and I know a lot of the mayors that were sitting in the room when we looked at this. This is about poverty. So as you can see, we're not the leader of the pack, so this chart is a little bit different than the other ones. The higher the bar you have, the worse off you are. It shows the percentage of your people living below the poverty line. Now, what this chart doesn't show you is that Denver, Raleigh, and Austin, over the last 5 years, have actually reduced the number of people living below the poverty line by double digits. What Indianapolis, unfortunately, as a metropolitan area, has the distinguished honor of having is the fastest growth rate of the percentage of people living below the poverty line. Nearly 6% increase in the number of people living below the poverty line. To put an exclamation point on that, over the last 5 years, thousands of more people now find themselves living below the poverty line here in central Indiana, even during one of the strongest economies we've seen in many years. The micro and macro scenarios here tell us that we have to do something bold to change the trajectory of our region. Thanks to the leadership of Representative Todd Houston, we had legislation authored this year that would do just that. It would allow communities to come together to marshal local revenue streams to invest regionally in the hope that it would do three things. One, it would create transformative quality of place projects that would make our region more attractive for the talented people and the companies that we want to move here. It also, number two, would hopefully be a catalyst for further economic development locally to increase our property tax base. And thirdly, if we grew our economy locally, it might just move that wage number up. Why are all three of those things so important? Because we have to grow our way out of these challenges. By generating this new tax base over the long term, we would have the revenue to be able to tackle these chronic issues that we find ourselves having today. Now, unfortunately, we were not able to get that passed at the state legislature this year. But I'm optimistic, and more importantly, I'm committed to seeing that we get this accomplished and we get the tools to be able to deal with these issues at a local level in the near future. I want to leave you today with a powerful anecdote of what can happen when we change our paradigm around problems and solutions and opportunities that arise when we don't think about them on the individual basis, but we think about them on the collective. My police chief, Ed Gephardt, and I were recently having a conversation about our approach to crime. And what we both came to the conclusion is that we've had a lot of great relationships in Hamilton County from law enforcement, but we've never been a regional leader in law enforcement the way that we needed to address crime, because crime does not care about political boundaries. And to Chief Gephardt's credit and his leadership team, they took that task on. So Chief Gephardt went down to IMPD and asked a very simple question. He said, hey, my mayor and I have talked. We want to be a regional partner in dealing with the crime issue here in central Indiana. How can we help? Now, to be honest with you, I was prepared for Chief Gephardt to come back and say, they want 15 of our best people to be in the homicide division. They want 15 of our best people to be in narcotics. They want us to patrol down to 82nd Street, any of the above. But when the chief came back, it wasn't at all like that. Chief said, the IMPD leadership looked at him and said, this is fantastic, Ed. We're glad that you want to be a part of this. Here's what we'd like you to do. As you go back in your daily police activities in Fishers, when you come across a gun or a piece of ballistic evidence, be a bullet or what have you, if you would process that gun or piece of ballistic evidence the same way that we do and share that information, that could be really helpful. Well, Ed and I kind of scratched our heads and thought, geez, that's not a big ask. I think we can do that. We implemented that 90 days ago. In the last 90 days, we've had 13 instances where we've processed evidence around a gun or a piece of ballistic evidence. Out of those 13 instances, 9 of them have direct matches, direct ties back to violent crime in Indianapolis. Drive-by shootings, people walking into the hospital with gunshot wounds, attempted murder, direct ties back to violent crime in Indianapolis. Now, if we would have continued to solve those problems with the lens that we always had, we would have collected that evidence in our city, used it for what we needed, and then destroyed it appropriately at the appropriate time. Now we share this information, and all of a sudden, we can put critical evidence at the scene of a violent crime in Indianapolis, or more importantly, hopefully we can tie an individual back to that crime and bring justice to the streets. Now, the impact was so profound and so swift that Chief Gephardt's leadership, just this last week, think we've got a picture here. He brought 100 of his closest local, state, and federal law enforcement friends together in Fishers to try to convince them to do the exact same thing. Our hope is that in the near future, all of central Indiana is processing these things the same way. Now, my point is if we can have such profound results from working together on the tactical level, imagine what our region could do if we started focusing together on the strategic things. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for our region to build a system that will allow us to speak with one collective voice, that will allow us to marshal some of our collective resources towards an idea or a vision that was once thought to be far too ambitious for any one individual city to accomplish. I am committed to seeing this happen in my next term in office, not only because I believe it's the right thing to do, but it's because I believe that it is directly tied to the long-term success of the city that I live in and the city that I love, Fishers. I want to thank you all for being here today, and let's keep our city moving forward. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.